Hey, what's up guys? Nick the Informative Fisherman here, and today I'm going to be breaking down March's Lucky Tackle Box Panfish Box. Let's crack her open and see what we have inside. So the first thing I grab out of here is the Mr. Crappie Spin Daddy, which is basically like a miniature spinner bait for crappie, red ear, yellow perch, any type of panfish you have in your area. Spinners are good, and I'm going to break down when and why. I'm going to go over all these baits first for you guys to take a look at. The Chasing Trophy Fish jerkbait. It's like a little tiny miniature jerkbait, which are really good during the bass pro spawn, but this is pro spawn, that's funny, which are really good for like crappie, yellow perch, and rainbow trout. The Rattle Trap miniature rattle trap. Now, I'm on Rattle Trap's national staff, and I even did a video talking about the miniature rattle trap being one of the most versatile lures in the world for catching anything from fresh, saltwater, you name it, and I'll explain why in a little bit here. The Lip Rippers Floating Dewies. These dang things, whoop, I forgot to cut the bottom open to get into one. These dang things are incredible pan fishing lures under a float or little tiny light jig heads, and I'll break that down. Some Mustad long shank hooks, Z-Man Slim Swims. These are the Elastec technology. These lures right here will last you like 50 to 100 fish. If you break off your jig, that's pretty much the only way you're losing them. The Elastec technology for these little minnow style swim baits here is incredible. I mean, you crazy glue this onto a jig head, it's gonna last all day, all night, multiple trips. Ooh, here we go, the Lucky Strike. This looks like a 2-inch chartreuse grub. There's a ton of grubs in there. If that doesn't last you half a season for some hardcore crappie or red ear fishing, I don't know what is, because that's a heck of a lot of grubs that come in that package right there. The Genius Baits, the scented, each one of these little grubs in here, this is a, looks like a 2 or 2.5 inch black grub. These are scented, they're pre-scented. These lures are designed to be like a sponge where they absorb a ton of scent. That way, if you're fishing them real slow or dragging them across the bottom, something where scent applies and you need the fish to hang on or a little bit longer, you need to trigger those extra bites on a tough day, it can be really good for you there. And the yellow ticket that comes in for Lucky Tackle Box Live, your card which tells you the value of each individual bait, and the Fish Hound, the magazine, which has breakdowns and articles on how to fish a lot of this stuff. So let's break them down a little bit more thorough. All right, the 1/16 ounce Mr. Crappie Spin Daddy right there. It looks like a size 6 hook. A 1/16 ounce is gonna give me a little bit more weight to cast that out there a little bit farther. I went ahead and cut the bottom off the package. And I'll show you, all that is a little tiny spinner bait with a round blade. That's a Colorado blade. This bait's gonna have some lift. I'm not gonna throw it on ultralight. I'm probably going to throw it on a light rod. And that's just the power class of the rod. And I'll probably fish this anywhere from 4 to 8 pound test line. It's gonna give me a little bit more range. With a spinner, you're looking to cast it far and cover water. You're not casting to a particular target, so a longer rod. The longer the rod, the better. A short rod tends to make a little bit more accurate cast. The long rod tends to make lesser accurate cast, unless you're pitching or flipping, but that's more of a bass thing. That longer rod's gonna give you more range, and that lighter rod. I'm gonna like a moderate to a moderate fast. Moderate would be bending in the middle, extra fast right up in the tip, so something with a little bit of cushion. The reason for it is the lighter the lure, as you're developing momentum with that cast, you want that rod to bend to where it's going to throw your lure farther. With a spinner like that, you're casting it out, you're covering a lot of water. This one here happens to be red and white. The nice part is, if you have dirty water, white always stands out. White is reflective towards UVA light, which is the radiation that burns our skin. So white is going to reflect that. If you're fishing dirty water, you want either a pure black or you want a pure white. Those are going to stand out. That little Colorado blade is going to put off a lot of thump. So this is a lure you could fish in dirty water, a little bit windier days, You know, so you have that advantage fishing there. I really wouldn't fish this in gin clear water, but if you have crappie around, yellow perch, rainbow trout, and the water's semi-stained or a little bit windier, and you need a little heavier lure to cast to get those extra bites, that one's gonna help you out a lot. All right, now let's go into the chasing trophy fish, that little minnow, that little jerkbait right there. This looks to be 2.5, 3 inches long. It's a very tiny jerkbait with little tiny treble hooks, but it's got some decent weight. I'm not sure exactly how heavy that one is. Doesn't say on the box, but it's a decent weight, so I'm probably gonna throw that on a light spinning rod or a medium light. A medium light would be like your common standard bass spinning rods, and the light one was just the one down there that I showed you. From there, I'm gonna throw it probably on that same pound test line. You can get away with throwing this on 10-pound test, but the one thing you want to keep in mind with a jerkbait, the thicker the line diameter, like 10-pound test, this may only get down 2-3 feet deep, but if I throw this on 4, I can probably get this thing down to 6 foot deep. So the lighter the line, the better the action a jerkbait's going to have underwater. You can also tie a loop knot on here too. If you want your jerkbait to have a more natural, longer twitch, like when you twitch and pause, this is how you want to work a jerkbait. You want to reel it, twitch, twitch, and you want to pause. On the stop is where jerkbaits really excel. So if you did a loop knot on that, you can get wider twitches. The bait will travel farther. The lighter the line and a loop knot, the bait will travel farther and wider during those twitches. The heavier the line, the less it's going to travel side to side, and your bait's gonna not act as natural. But if you're gonna use like 8 to 10 pound, I suggest using a loop knot. If you're throwing lighter lines, go ahead and use a clinch knot or improved clinch knot on this, and it'll still work really natural. That bigger, heavier line is going to dictate more of the movement on there. The double surgeon's loop knot's a really good one. Maybe I'll throw the illustration up here to show you guys. It's one I use very often on lighter, smaller lures. More than likely, I'm going to be targeting crappie or trout with this guy here. Shell crackers, red ears are more or less bottom feeders. They're not really minnow feeders. So if I find crappie in the pre-spawn or crappie in the post-spawn where they're spread out and along the bank, I'm going to make that long cast with a jerkbait again. I'm not pinpointing an exact target. I'm making a long cast, covering water, just like that spinner, and that's going to help you find them. And that pause, a lot of the time on a day where they're being a little bit more lethargic, for example, I said throw the spinner when it's dirty. If that water's clean and calm, this little rip bait, this little jerkbait style minnow here is going to outperform a spinner. But if it was dirty, that spinner would outperform the jerkbait. So that's something for you guys to think about there. Now for the rattle trap tiny trout. This one right here is an 1/8 ounce. And believe it or not, this thing casts a country mile. You could throw it on your bass spinning rod, that's your medium light. You could throw it on the light. I don't like to throw it on ultralight. I tend to fish this thing on 6 to 10 pound, and why I'm getting away from the 4 is bass also love to eat this. A lot of the time when I'm searching for crappie, trout, or yellow perch, bass will come up and crush this thing. And I'm talking, I've caught 2 or 3 6+ pound largemouth on this bait, and this is why I tend to not fish it below 6 pound, because I like to get my lure back and I like to land those big fish. On 4 pound, you're in for a marathon of a fight against a big largemouth. Now this looks like a very natural shad. This is nickel and blue right here. I'm not sure what color you got, but a nickel and blue is for bright sunny days. A little bit of wind chop, a little bit like 5, 10, 15 mile an hour wind is going to help this bait perform. If it's slick calm, it's usually not a good performer. But if the fish are deep, if you see them on your fish finder like 20, 30 feet deep, you can drop this straight down and vertically jig it and let it sink. And it has a ton of vibration and a ton of audio. On those days where it's windier, the fish are going to tend to move shallower, and you can cast and retrieve. This is the same thing. You want to cast far and you want to retrieve it. This is kind of a variable in between that spinner and in between that jerkbait. So Lucky Tackle Box was really thinking when they put this box together for you guys, because they're giving you all the options. A little slightly larger treble hook. This is why I like that 6 pound. I don't need 4. You do want to, with all these baits, the bigger the spinner has an individual size 6 hook on it, to where you could pull them a little bit harder away from structure and cover. But anytime you have a treble hook, you want your drag to be set light. You want to take your time, because small treble hooks, as the fish is pulling, and if you're pulling hard, it's going to wear a larger hole where that hook penetrated, and the odds of them coming off are higher if your drag's set tight. If these small treble hooks penetrate and your drag's loose, the odds of them tearing a bigger hole are not as good, because as they turn, it's giving them the line to where it's not trying to work a bigger hole into that fish. But that little rattle trap is a phenomenal fish catcher. You go throw this, pretty much everything that eats bait, eats minnows in a system will attack this. A lot of the time in the winter time, I find this bait to be a phenomenal performer. In the winter time, when that water is below 50 degrees, I like to cast it out, let it sink, and I like to lift my rod and let it fall. Reel a little bit, lift it, let it fall. That's that yo-yo retrieve. That yo-yo retrieve. As the water gets a little bit above 60 degrees, I like to cast it out and just reel it in. As it hits the surface, you can reel it in, fish for surface fish. You can count it down a few seconds, fish for suspended fish. You can let it fall to a rocky bottom, hop it up, and retrieve it right along the bottom. So this is a slow sinking bait that gives you the option to fish all parts of the water column and is going to put an absolute ton of fish in the boat. So if you haven't had the opportunity to fish these, you should. They're insanely productive. Now let's venture into our plastics category. The Lip Rippers Dewey right here. I'm gonna rig this on probably no heavier than a 1/32 ounce jig head. I prefer to fish it on 1/64 on an ultralight. Here's my ultralight rod, and I happen to have one nose hooked right there. Why do I have it nose hooked instead of threaded? Well, this little worm on a super slow fall has all sorts of little vibration and natural movement. If you thread it onto a jig head, it's not gonna have as much movement. To where if I see suspended panfish, if I see crappie sitting next to a tree or bluegill sitting next to a tree, I like to nose hook it on a little tiny weighted hook and cast it out there. If I can't get close enough to them to cast, let's say I'm fishing from the bank and I see a bush or a tree and there's panfish next to it, I'm probably gonna put a rocket bobber up there and fish it that same way. If I'm gonna fish it along the bottom, I'm going to thread it up that jig head, and I'll show you the difference here. All right, this is the nose hook. This is how I like to fish it under a bobber. It has way more subtle action. If you find them ripping the worm off, you can go ahead and thread it up that jig head the same way I like to fish it along the bottom. I like to bounce it and dance it and slowly reel it and retrieve it along the bottom, and I'll show you what that looks like. That's what it looks like threaded onto that jig head. If the fish are active, you're still gonna get a lot of action there falling under a bobber, and you're gonna lose less worms. But if you're trying to get a few extra bites, nose hooking it like I had before can be extremely useful. Now, where does this come into play versus throwing something like a reaction style bait, like that jerk bait, like a spinner, like that rattle trap? Well, let's say you have the fish located. Well, now you know where they're at. Throwing it on a bobber or throwing it on a jig head, if you're looking to cast it without a bobber, 16th or a 1/32 is going to be a little bit better than that 1/64. Unless you can get close, then the 1/64 is going to get more bites. It's more subtle, it's more natural. I'm going to fish these little tiny jig heads down to 4-pound line, and I'll fish it often on 2, but if you're getting started, fish it on 4. I like to throw these also when it's super calm, super clear, to where I know I'm going to get very few bites. That's where that little Dewey is going to put a lot of fish in the boat. Now let's take a look at our Genius Baits grubs and our Lucky Strike grubs right here. When would I fish a chartreuse green versus a black grub right here? Well, I said earlier in this film that dirty water, you need a really dark color. If that water's dark, but it's calm out, okay? If that water's dirty and it's slick calm is where I really like to fish my plastics. I'm gonna rig these as heavy as an 1/8 ounce jig head and probably as light as a 16th or a 1/32 ounce. But this guy right here, if I could see a few feet deep, but there's a lot of green in the water, like early summer, June, May, June, there's a lot of greenery in the water, that chartreuse tends to be very successful. And the reason why a lot of juvenile fish like bluegills have chartreuse in their fins. But if that water's dirty, on the other hand, I'm gonna throw something pure black with some scent. I need to appeal to those fish's other abilities, as in their smell and their vision. To see through that dark water, they need a dark silhouette. I'm either gonna throw a white or I'm gonna throw a black. If I have a little bit more visibility, the water's a little bit green, I see a lot of juvenile panfish around, that's a perfect time to throw something like that chartreuse grub right there. Those jig head choices are gonna be good for you guys. If I'm throwing an 1/8 ounce and heavier, I'm gonna throw it on a medium light, my bass spinning rod. And I'm probably going to throw it as light as 4 pound, but I like to throw these, if I'm throwing on 1/8 ounce, I like to throw it on 6 pound test line. You tend to catch a lot of bass and bigger predator fish on these bigger grubs like this. If I'm throwing anything lighter, like 1/32 and down, I'm going to throw it on a light spinning rod. And once again, you are most likely making long casts to cover water with these, but even if you have fish spotted and located, if there's a little bush and you're pitching the grub up, reeling it past, you might want to throw a fast action rod to be a little bit more accurate to place those baits. If you're looking to cast far, throw a moderate action and a little bit longer of a rod. Something 5.5, 6 foot might be good for targeting something right in front of you in a fast action. Something getting up as long as 7 foot. That's a little bit more limber, is going to be better for covering water. But you can fish all of these on a variety of spinning rods or even casting rods if you really want to. You just have to keep in mind what you need to do. If you have that single hook, you can have your drag a little bit tighter on a jig head. Single hook, I'm going to have my drag slightly tighter, not locked down. I still want the fish to take line, but if I'm fishing a treble hook, I'm going to fish that drag backed off a little bit more. All right, for the Z-Man Slim Swims, I believe that's what they're called, Slim Swims, yes. That's a minnow style bait right there. If there's juvenile shad around, like in the spring, this can be really good. In the fall, this can be really good when fish tend to chase a lot of bait. Now, why would I throw something like this versus the 2 other grubs that we got on the box? This is a boot tail. It's gonna have a very subtle swimming action like that through the water. It's going to have less action. It's more of a translucent color, which is going to be really good in calm, clean water. If I find that the fish are suspended, I'm going to throw it on a lighter jig head. If I'm finding fish along the bottom, I'm going to put it on a heavier jig head. I think the lightest I fished this is a 1/16 ounce. And once again, you're trying to cover water, make long casts, so a longer rod, a little bit more limber rod is going to help you out with that. I wouldn't throw this in dirty water. I wouldn't throw this in low visibility. I would throw this probably over everything else in here if the water was gin clear and calm. So Lucky Tackle Box gave you a lot of options this month, guys. If you like this video and the other ones, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Make sure to like and share this video. We greatly appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.